Okay, so just to introduce Simone, I mean, you'll probably tell us more about you, but we know that you have been writing about Korea for a long time. You received your PhD in political science from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and teach at Northeastern University. Over 20 years of teaching and research experience, including serving as an associate in research at the Harvard University Korea Institute. Dr. Chun serves on the steering committee for the Alliance of Scholars Concerned about Korea and is a member of the Korea Policy Institute and the Korean Peace Network. She regularly contributes to various media outlets and has presented widely on inter-Korean relations. As a researcher and activist, Dr. Chun strives to create meaningful engagements between South Korean activists, scholars, and NGOs worldwide. And we are really honored that you are here with the New York, New Jersey Korea Peace Now Network. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, Simone. We're very interested to hear what you have to say about the Korean elections and how that affects our work.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's of course I love to see all of you and virtually, and especially Young. We had such fond memories when we went to as a Women Cross DMZ Peace Initiative in Seoul. So I'm so happy to see you now. It's a pleasure and honor to join New York and New Jersey Korea Peace Now. So I have prepared PowerPoint slides for my talk. So let me share my screen. So the title of my talk is 2022 South Korean Presidential Elections. No mandate for a hawkish pivot. And as probably we all know, the election outcome, the conservative candidate Yoon Suk-yeol won, to our great disappointment. In fact, when I was was asked to give a talk, and my feeling was, as a lot of Koreans who have also been disappointed and depressed and such a setback, I almost felt like, I don't want to even think about it. But there is an important, it's important to have accurate analysis of the situation. So I think this is not the time to give up, and rather it's actually the time to review and analyze more vigorously what have happened. So the order of my talk will be about as follows. First, I will talk about a Hawkish new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, and what I call the Washington consensus, meaning that Washington welcomed the conservative win. And my argument is that the outcome of election was rather razor thin margin, that is a 0.7% margin win, and which has been very, in my view, grossly misinterpreted by Washington consensus, as if it is a mandate for a hawkish policy. And second, I will look at following my argument, exploiting a razor-thin victory as a mandate for brinkmanship. There, I will look at how it is a validity, so it's give a sort of a legitimacy for hardline policy. Third, I'll provide evidence that shows more votes for liberal and progressive parties, although the conservative won. Fourth, I will look at how the North Korean threat and the relationship between North Korean threat and the US anti-China machine, that is how the US anti-China machine is using, exploiting the North Korean threat. And fifth, I'll look at, in spite of this very a strong push for hawkish policy, in my view, there are some obstacles to implementing hardline policies. And six, I will look at as therefore how it is important to contest the new hawkishness. Before 5 days before the election, March 9th election, I did write a short op-ed piece called the 2022 South Korean presidential election. At the time, of course, I was hoping for the victory of Democratic Party candidate, the Liberal Democratic Party candidate, Lee Jae-myung, who was a human rights lawyer, who is great, who has been a grassroots organizer and also very experienced politicians, very competent, knowledgeable, and progressive. And so my, at the time, obviously, I was hoping for his victory. So the question that I raised was at the time, will Koreans choose pragmatism? Because at the time, the liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung, with regard to foreign policy, he was promoting more pragmatic and result-oriented engagement, as opposed to the conservative Yoon Suk-yeol, who is what I coined as a saber rhetoric. Now we know the result, and so what was the result? Result was that it was conservative Yoon Suk-yeol's victory was about 0.7%, 0.7% victory. Now, one thing I want to point out is that a lot of images or slides that I'm going to use will have Korean, so no worries. I will translate and make it understandable. So this is Yoon Suk-yeol, the conservative candidate, and he was a career prosecutor, and in fact, he was prosecutor nominated and appointed by President Moon Jae-in, and his task was to reform the South Korea's most powerful prosecutor's office. And those of you who may be wondering what is about these prosecutors in South Korea's prosecutors, and is the most powerful now emerging as a political interest groups, because they have both the very exclusive power of indictment and investigation. So, for instance, if I give you, let's suppose, Biden's attorney general somehow, wanted to cause trouble for Biden, and he will go after all those, Biden's enemies, and then he will kind of, try to help them for political purpose. So anyway, the Korea's prosecutors, Yoon Suk-yeol was a prosecutor general, and for the last 2 years, or 3 years when he was a prosecutor, he pretty much went after most Moon Jae-in's progressive reform and Moon Jae-in's supporters and prominent politicians. And so he he led even as a prosecutor general, he led a very sort of anti-Moon Jae-in movement. And so anyways, that's his background. And there's Lee Jae-myung was obviously the one that I just mentioned as the Democratic Party's candidate. And there's the third one, it's a minor party, it's a progressive party. Sim Sang-jung was a female candidate. She got about 2.4%. Now, so that was the election outcome. Again, the main point being it was only the victory by 0.7%. So let's look at more closely, look at some of the data. Now, although Yoon Suk-yeol won, conservative candidate won, if you put the total votes that Liberal Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, and Progressive Party, Justice Party, Sim Sang-jung, if you put those together, they together got more votes. So more votes for Liberal and Progressive parties. Right. So what that means is, again, to give a sort of accurate understanding of the election outcome. So more Koreans voted for Liberal and Progressive parties than the Conservative Party that won. So Yoon Suk-yeol Conservative Party also won as a result of last-minute merger with another conservative, the An Chol-soo, who ran, he quit last minute. So this was the outcome of the election. Now, this is again to look at, just to emphasize how close the election. It was the closest election in South Korean history. And again, you can see the image of the election result. Now, if you look at the next one is about that shows votes by age. Now, it's interesting that men under 30s, the conservative, those who voted for conservatives are male voters under age 30 and people over 60s. Those are strong conservatives. And women under 30s, they voted for Liberal Party. And also people between in the age 30s, 40s, and 50, they supported. So blue is the Democratic Liberal Party, right? So they voted. So this shows kind of again what was the characteristics of a Korean electorate. Interesting about kind of detail about women under 30. Here you can see the clear contrast between male voters and female voters. Male voters are very toward the conservative, and the women, young women voters are liberal. And the interesting point also is that women voted in the 20s led at the last stage of election, their campaign, they led very very strong push for Lee Jae-myung. So and also even after the election, right now, the very first group who's really campaigning very hard for progressive reforms are women in the 20s and 30s. So which I think for our group, it might be also interesting to look at. And this is another looking at the vote by region. So this is Korea, unfortunately, only obviously South Korea. I wish we had election unified Korea. That's maybe there will come someday. Now this part, the red is about the conservative, and also look at the blue is more liberal. And here we're looking at even in Seoul, you see here this kind of partial red. Very richest part in Seoul, called Gangnam, is like South Korea's Beverly Hills. 90% voted for conservative Yoon Suk-yeol because he's looked at as someone who's defending rich people's interest. And also this blue here about southwestern part. This is where you remember. Traditionally, there has been, under especially previous authoritarian government, who has been repressed. You recall the 1980 Gwangju massacre, Gwangju Peace People's Movement. So this year, traditionally has been very liberal. The red part here, southeast, this is actually my hometown here. It's conservative, basically power base. They voted for 70%, over 70% voted for Yoon Suk-yeol. Now, looking at this outcome, so as I started by saying that I don't agree with the sort of mainstream media's analysis of the election. What happened is that the outcome was pretty much determined by a very sustained attack, reactionary attack on the progressive candlelight movement. For the last 2 years or more so, President Moon probably couldn't really do much. And also President Moon, he was a somewhat weak leader, although, as you know, he became president because of the great candlelight movement, which actually impeached his predecessor, Park Geun-hye. A third of Koreans participated in the candlelight movement. So there's enormous opportunity, momentum, but critics of President Moon, including myself, looked at that this was a lost opportunity. And Moon's failure in implementing progressive reforms was the cause of the outcome of the election, in my view. Moreover, also, however, there is also a public anger of rising very speculative housing prices, which, we also, can identify with it. A lot of people have that problem. And also other issues such as income inequality, youth unemployment, and also very divisive campaign that Yoon Suk-yeol, this conservative candidate, ran. He's sort of looked at as South Korea's Trump. So you can understand that what kind of person, what kind of campaign he ran. Misogynistic, a very divisive, and hate-filled campaign that he ran. And there are two more important factors that explain the outcome of the election. That is, South Korea's 5 major corporate media all leaned toward conservative favor. Now, so literally, Lee Jae-myung, the liberal candidate, his message could not go out, and and media was the way it was lopsided sort of a reporting of the in favor of conservative. And another was the one that I just mentioned. South Korea's powerful, the new interest groups, politicized prosecutors who empowered, obviously, the Yoon Suk-yeol where he's come from. So these factors pretty much determine the outcome of the election. Now, so election is over. I'll look at next slide, how Koreans are not at all satisfied with the result. Now, here we learn low approval ratings. Usually, so here looking at this one shows that the approval rating between President Moon and now President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. So Yoon Suk-yeol's approval rating, so this is the red is Yoon Suk-yeol, the concern. His approval rating is lower than the outgoing President Moon. Usually this is a problem because if you look at this one, says a record low confidence in Yoon's ability to perform presidential duties. So in other words, the Koreans, they are not satisfied with the election result, nor do they have confidence in Yoon's ability to perform his duties successfully. Now, the Korean translation of this shows that people were asked about what they thought about Yoon's ability to perform. Like favorable rating was about 52.7. Now, what this means is compared with the previous president-elect, usually right after the election, the president-elect get approval rating of 70 and 80%. This was Lee Myung-bak. Park Geun-hye she even got 64%. Moon Jae-in got approval rating 74% right after the election. But so Yoon Suk-yeol got about 52%. So this is not a obviously good sign for Yoon Suk-yeol. So as April 7th, the consensus among some of this progressive newspaper media is that a month of Yoon shows that he is following footsteps of failed former president. So in other words, this shows that Yoon Suk-yeol's his beginning is not so great. Nevertheless, we look at the Washington's response. Washington's response, here's an example. Op-ed, it's from Washington Post. South Korea's hawkish new president will be good for the Western alliance. Now, why will it be good? If you look at their argument, they said Yoon's victory will strengthen the U.S.-South Korean alliance and coordination between Washington and Seoul to pursue containment policy. Containment policy means that pretty much anti-China policy. That you will see, therefore, as if this is a mandate for hawkish policy, there's op-ed from the Hill, time to reconstitute pressure on Pyongyang. And the way they looked at is, if you look at some of the details, Article 1, the op-ed said Yoon was justifiably viewed by many leading Korea watchers in the US as a more pro-US and anti-China candidate than his left-wing Lee Jae-myung. So you can see that this is the way that the Washington's, some of the mainstream media and also Washington foreign policy elite and look at this candidate. And they will call, if you look at their language, they said the engagement policy, for instance, which liberal Democratic Party support is called appeasement, and appeasement of North Korea. So therefore, the conclusion is Yoon Suk-yeol's victory is welcomed. Moreover, it's very very dangerous sort of rhetoric. Some even, this is article that my good friends shared with me. If you read this article title says how Washington and Seoul can get on the same page to deter North Korea. In that article, if you look at it, they even suggest, the author suggests even some kind of U.S.-South Korean joint military exercises include a scenario in which they explore the conditions under which the United States would decide with the South Korean input to use nuclear weapons against North Korea. So this is all, as you can see, very alarming. Again, to reiterate my point, the election outcome was not a mandate for hawkish policy, but this is the way they are going. Now, so let's look at what was as Yoon's hawkish rhetoric. As Christine Aunt pointed out, well, it's South Korea's new conservative president will likely set back peace and gender equality. Now let's look at what is Yoon's policy. He promotes very hawkish view that prioritizes almost exclusively broadening South Korea's military commitment to the U.S. and subordination of Seoul to Washington's policy. Yoon designated North Korea as the main enemy, which previous liberal president stopped doing it. So this year, his South Korean president, officially designated North Korea as not the main enemy. Yoon Suk-yeol believed that she's a believer of CVID, what it called the complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement of a North Korean nuclear weapon. As you know, that policy, Christina also argued in this article, has failed for decades. Moreover, Yoon, during the campaign, he really went on to sort of McCarthyian red baiting against liberals, anti-communist, and also anti-China rhetoric. And moreover, he also called for preemptive strike against the North, although that would mean that nuclear war. Yoon also expressed his support for a U.S. ROK military, US ROK Japan military alliance, even if that means that allowing Japanese troops and Japanese who colonized Korea for 35 years, and we still have those horrible memories. So even if that you're allowing Japanese troops in the Korean Peninsula, so it created a lot of controversy. And he also said that he would, his administration will purchase additional THAAD batteries. Although Biden and Moon administration implemented a policy decision says they don't need another THAAD battery in South Korea. 6 is enough. And last week during the visit to Washington, Yoon's advisors sought President-elect Yoon says he wants U.S. nuclear bombers and submarines to return. Now, so again, to reiterate my point, election was not a mandate for hawkish policy, but it is actually Yoon who is driving that policy, fueling that very hawkish policy. Hence, what we have is, as also Christine An pointed out, and also many of us look at, is emboldening hardliners in Korea and the U.S. And it's going to be pivot. Yoon's victory is going to hawkish pivot in South Korea and away from engagement efforts under Moon And moreover, Yoon will be more proactively, in my view, volunteer to join the anti-China bloc proposed by the United States. So to summarize the way I look at, the way I analyze the election. So what is it? The key point is that 0.7% victory margin is not a mandate for a hawkish pivot. They reflect the voters' anger at the failed progressive reforms. As I pointed out, more votes for liberals, progressive, than conservatives. As I pointed out, about 50.3% votes for liberal and progressive parties, and 48% votes for the Conservative Party. And moreover, Yoon's hardline policies were not popular at all among Korean voters during the campaign. He was actually ridiculed. He's, in my view, the most ignorant candidate that I have seen in many years. And also he's very also proud of being ignorant and very not at all prepared. So his foreign policy was his views are very unpopular, and consistently there has been very strong public support for inter-Korean engagement. But nevertheless, Yoon is pushing for his policies. Now, let me look at another factor that shows why the Koreas, in a way that we are looking at this, despite the Moon's peace process, peace initiative, we are kind of going backward. Here, the data that you're looking at is South Korea emerging itself as major exporter of weapons. And you can see there, South Korea's after United States, Russia, France, Germany, China, UK, Spain. So it's not a small country, it's a helpless country, but it is becoming a major country that has a military industrial complex. So this is also another driving force that also explains why the peace initiative, there is a setback in peace initiative. Why, regardless who becomes the president, we are seeing this more greater sort of obstacles for implementing inter-Korean agreement or other related peace initiative. So another looking at here is also projected increase in South Korean national defense budget. As you can see, under Moon, interestingly, while Moon was implementing those Moon's peace initiative, actually there is a dramatic increase in national defense budget, and is likely to increase more. So in other words, this also shows another factor that kind of add tension in the Korean Peninsula. As you already know that South Korea already has the sixth largest conventional army. And if you compare that with North Korea is about 30th. So this also kind of explain why, this data explain why Moon's also, in a way, Moon's peace initiative, it was contradictory and why it failed. And this graph shows public perception of Moon's North Korea policy. There's this dramatic increase what people thought of Moon's North Korea policy. But you can see the gradual sort of declining. What it shows that people are being disappointed at Moon's failure in implementing inter-Korean agreements, and also his sort of he's rather subordinating policies to the United States. And during this time, as you remember, North Korea has kept its word just to some extent. North Korea has kept its sort of self-moratorium on testing nukes and ICBMs until this month. 2019, Kim Jong-un even proposed in the New Year address, he said, unconditional reopening of Mount Kumgang, and also Kaesong Industrial Complex is the inter-Korean, had been very successful inter-Korean economic initiative, which previous Park Geun-hye government shut down. But there's no response from South Korea and continuing to subordinate to the United States. Now, so what else can we add? Now, here's the relationship between North Korean threat and U.S. anti-China policy. Now, so you may wonder, so why then? What is this? Almost like 7 decades of North Korean threat, especially it's in very dominance in the U.S. media and also U.S. policymakers. One argument, which many of us agree, is that U.S.-China tensions feed into tensions in the Korean Peninsula. I think that Gregory mentioned, point out this very clearly, and this is also the second point. Is also something Greg said. The North Korean threat sells well to the American people, and this also North Korean threat, which United States needs for its 7 years of containment policy. Now it's a new U.S. anti-China policy. It also is used by Korean conservatives. So Noam Chomsky, which stated, the North Korean threat provides justification for the right-wing regime in the South. Relaxation with the North Korea would mean conservative losing power. So this was based on the interview that I had actually a while ago. It was 2000, I believe, 17. And so in other words, there's a sort of collusion of interest, shared interest between conservative in South Korea and Washington's foreign policy lead. So to recap, South Korean election was a razor thin, it was not a mandate, but it has been exploited as a mandate for hawkish policies, and it's welcome. Now, that being said, my own prediction is that it's going to be hard to implement that policies. Now, here is, before I move on to that part, this just to show example of how North Korea is misrepresented. This is a very recent, just last week, article. Now, Kim Yo-jong said that, in response to pointing out, in reaction to the very bellicose statement made by Moon's NSA, saying that in response to North Korea's latest ICBM test, South Korea is going to show its capability to strike North. And so Kim Yo-jong said that in response to this, and also indirectly referring to Yoon Suk-yeol's, preemptive strike threat, Kim Yo-jong said, "We are not going to fire even a single bullet towards South Korea, unless South Korea attacks us." So that's what she said. But the same statement is reported. If you look at this, an example, Telegraph said that Kim Jong-un's sister warns North Korea could eliminate the South with the nuclear weapons. So this is sort of give an example of how the way North Korea is portrayed in the Western media, and to fuel that sort of image as a mad country and threat and posing a threat. Now, so as I mentioned a minute ago, I think that there are obstacles though to the hawkish pivot. The one is Yoon's policy has been kind of summarized as two no's and one yes. That means no to North Korea, no to China, and yes, big yes to U.S. position. Now, I think this is going to be although that's the rhetoric. It's very very politically popular among some conservative, but it's going to be very difficult to implement. And for the obvious reason, South Korea is South Korea is a major trading partner. You cannot alienate, nor can you deal confront China militarily. So it's almost impossible. So that this Yoon's rhetoric, no to North Korea, no to China, yes to US position, is not going to be easy to implement. Secondly, South Koreans, majority of South Koreans support for a balanced stance on US-China competition. Yes, there is sort of rising sort of negative perception about China among Koreans. But Koreans, if you look at it, they're very pragmatic. They want a balanced position. I'll show you this opinion survey to prove it. And Yoon's hawkish pivot and also Washington's hawkish pivot also will fail because they're focusing on the denuclearization, complete CVID strategy, which has been failed in the past. And if it's going to insist on that, it's also going to fail. And the last point, another obstacle will be China and Russia are increasingly against this Biden's anti-China, anti-Russia policy because of that. So Russia and China are less likely to cooperate with the United States with regard to sanctions. We have already seen that that's happening. Now, let's look at, give you some of those data that supports my argument about why this Yoon's, also Washington anti-China policy, hawkish policies are not going to be easy to implement as successful. This shows that South Koreans prefer balanced diplomacy. Now, what it shows that the one here on top, the majority of Koreans, they said that they prefer, with regard to the US and China competition, they want a balanced diplomacy. They don't want to go to the way Yoon propose, very strong pro-US. So that is, again, it shows Yoon Suk-yeol's position is not shared by majority of Americans, no, majority of Koreans. Although you can see that there's a gradual sort of increase in strength in people who support strengthening ROK-US alliance. That is also a fact. That is true. Now, another you can see is that why anti-China policy is not going to work for the money, economic reason. China is the big #1 trading partner for South Korea, and United States come very distant second. So for that reason, it's the Yoon's insisting on the Yoon's anti-China policy is going to probably leave us as a rhetoric. It's going to be hard to implement. And also there's also other issues there, such as backlash against any retaliation from China. And so that's another possibility. Now, as I mentioned earlier, yes, there are a lot of sort of negative among Koreans and unfavorable, perception of China is definitely rising. But nevertheless, when you really look into the reality, majority of Koreans believe China and South Korea can benefit each other economically. So that's, this is the first issue. So they have a mutual interest, not the way the United States wants South Korea, right, to have anti-China perception. And of course, but they look at a competitor. Right? There's a market opportunity, etc. And how about South Korea, the way South Korea look at US global leadership? What you look at is here, you can see that the South Korea, US global leadership is important, is decreasing. So South Koreans now believe that US is, obviously, not only South Korean, but also, we also believe the US is definitely diminishing as a global leader. What else? Again, to reiterate my point about the South, the way, no matter how strongly Yoon tried to push with his anti-China agenda, or how the United States wants Koreans to be anti-China and become pro-US bloc, the Koreans, their perception are not going to go along with that. Another, South Korean sentiment toward participation in US-led global world order. This is kind of interesting. I wish I could go more about this, but later, maybe another time. The interesting point is that how the younger South Koreans increasingly disagree with participating in the U.S. world order, in a way, especially it is young people. If there's any military conflict, young people who's going to have to, who's going to sacrifice. So there's less support for that. Again, to show the way mass media, corporate media, and also all the Washington foreign policy elite present or wanted to understand where South Koreans stands with regard to U.S. and China competition, as you have a very different picture here. In contrast, this is also the majority of South Koreans optimistic about inter-Korean relationship. This is data in 2021, just last year. It was data from the Koreans, the Democratic and Unification Committee. So this shows that what they thought about inter-Korean relations is going to get better or just stay the same. So majority of people, this is means that will be improved. The status quo. This means that people thought that's going to get worse. So if you could put together majority of Koreans, in spite of what happened in December 2021, they feel kind of optimistic about inter-Korean relationship. So that's what Koreans think. And majority of South Koreans do not regard the North as an enemy. So this is the Koreans, they were asked about whether North Korea is a partner for cooperation and support, aid. This is what majority Koreans viewed North Korea as, not as enemies. It's a nation that we need to help and cooperate, not an enemy. This is again shown. And majority of South Koreans approve of inter-Korean engagement. This one says 67.8% says end of war declaration is necessary. Nevertheless, interestingly, this is again 2021 survey. 54% of Korean thought that U.S. North Korean talk are not likely to resume anytime soon. So kind of pessimistic about U.S. North Korean relations. Now, 60.9% Koreans support relaxing sanctions. And they also support helping North Korea with the COVID, vaccine and food aid, and helping pregnant women and elderly, etc. Again, this is the way Koreans think about inter-Korean engagement. And majority of South Koreans approve of inter-Korean engagement. 74% support helping North Korea with the COVID vaccine. Majority of South Koreans want peace with the North. This one says South Korean public opinion regarding a peace agreement to end the Korean War. Strongly support, 55.5%. 78.7% support the peace with the North. So that's about data of 2021. So the next one I'm looking at is actually rather recent article. It's article last week, I believe. Do South Koreans support a peace treaty with the North? This is an article research from Professor Timothy Rich. And he did, according to his survey, shows the majority of Koreans approve of the idea, interestingly, even among supporters of President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol. To me, that's very interesting. But let's look at the way he summarized his research findings, that despite recent missile tests by North Korea and the lack of meaningful inter-Korean dialogue, a clear majority of South Koreans approve of the idea. Even among those who had the plan to vote for Yoon Suk-yeol, the conservative presidential candidate, now president-elect, a thin majority support a peace treaty. in contrast to Yoon's rhetoric about tougher stance toward North Korea and the expectation that his administration will not continue President Moon Jae-in's call for peace treaty without first denuclearization efforts by Pyongyang. So this is article up on April 6th. It's rather recent. Now, nevertheless, if you look at that article, Professor Rich also pointed out that probably Koreans just support caveat is that instead of thinking this is sort of a realistic possibility, but Koreans thinking more, overall, so to somewhat abstract, a sort of wish that they support. So it's important to, have that caveat. So this is from Professor Rich's research. Majority of South Koreans want a peace treaty with the North. Now here, this is so overall about 70%. Lee Jae-myung supporters, Democratic Party supporters, more than 90% supports peace treaty with the North. Even Yoon Suk-yeol's about close to 50%. Yoon Suk-yeol supporters also support the peace treaty. Majority of South Koreans want a peace treaty with the North. The question he asked was, do you support a peace treaty with the North? Those who are very progressive, 90%. So even the most conservative here, the most conservative voters, among them, almost 30% said they support peace treaty. Now, so what do we have here is bipartisan majority Korean support for peace. So that's the way I think I would interpret. Now, so what I think is that it is important data. Again, you won't see this kind of data, playing on CNN or even other media often. This is what Koreans think. So what I call this is a mandate. If you ask me if this is a mandate, people's mandate, not the mandate exploited by Washington's foreign policy elite and also the South Korean minority hawkish, the conservative. So it's important for us to amplify this fact. Hence, I hear, because I mentioned earlier, why there is despite that there's strong push for a hawkish policy, because of those geopolitical factors, Yoon Suk-yeol's and the Washington elite hawkish policy are not going to be so easy to implement. And because Korean voters support peace, and the real mandate is, again, there's very strong undercurrent among Koreans that for yearning for peace and almost bipartisan support. So that raises the question. I think this is Gregory's excellent article that he published about at the time, thinking about upcoming South Korean election. I think this was at the end of his article. I agree very much. Progressive in South Korea face a twofold struggle in the month ahead, pressing their government to improve inter-Korean relations. This is an important point because even Moon, there was great opportunities, but the opportunities that have not been exploited. Now, President Moon could have pursued those inter-Korean cooperation, and a lot of them were even had nothing to do with the sanction, but he chose not to. So it's important. And blocking being dragged into the U.S. and anti-China military mission. So it's twofold struggle. At the heart of both issues, I think the excellent point that Greg makes is the resistance to U.S. encroachment upon South Korean sovereignty. It will not be an easy struggle, but it is a necessary one. And I agree with his point. So here's even the most, the important evidence of South Korea not having sovereignty. South Korea does not even, as we all know now, does not even have, operational, conduct to war, right? Of that, OPCON. Now, So how should we resist the hawkish pivot, especially when this is not at all what people want, not a mandate. It's being kind of exploited and being sold to the people, and it's very difficult next 5 years because we have the most hawkish president in South Korea, and the U.S. is all supporting him. So it's going to, for the movement side, it's going to be really most toughest next 5 years. So how can we resist? First, I think there has to support pragmatic and result-oriented approach toward détente. Détente means détente with North Korea, with China. De-escalation with the North and China. And United Liberal Progressive Front. I said United Liberal Progressive, this is more referring to South Korean election outcome. As you saw, there was, if let's say that the minor Progressive Party, Justice Party, merged with the Liberal Party, we would have actually Lee Jae-myung, the Liberal president elect, right now. But so there was, that unity didn't happen, and that's another story. Probably later, maybe I can address that in Q&A. So anyway, you need a United Liberal Progressive Front because there are potentials. In other words, this is in the past, South Korean, there's a, I'll put it this way, this is the first time that the Liberal Progressive have had more votes than the Conservative. So they don't have to actually compromise with the Conservative. So they can do their own unified front. That's where opportunity lies. And expansion of solidarity with other peace groups. So within the United States, I think that our, my good friend and also, brilliant scholar, Tim Bill, based in New Zealand, and also Greg and all others, we pointed out that, still South Korea issue, peace issue is not really made in the mainstream America's consciousness. So it's still very kind of minor, we are minority. So we need our allies. So it means expanding solidarity, which I think that our group, your group is doing heroically. And also to resist a hawkish pivot, we have to win this information war. This is also an idea that also I got from my good friend. And because, as I just pointed out, tried to do in this talk, there is so much misinformation and brainwashing, propaganda, manufacturing of consent. So this is very important to have accurate analysis of the reality and the situation. Now, so let's look at this as a part of contesting that pivot to hawkish pivot. I think with this, we already know, and many of us already participated. There's a call for suspending US ROK military exercises, decreasing military tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Now, the joint military exercise will be happening this month. Now, as we know, that is not at all military exercises. The exercise itself is a cause for raising tension. It also includes decapitation of North Korean leadership. North Korea has opposed justifiably. And so this is I think they're going to go ahead with the drill, but still I think we should strongly, vigorously oppose it. This is the pictures of anti-Yun protests. In other words, anti-Yun protests already started. I would say candlelight movement to check Yoon Suk-yeol's any draconian or authoritarian or repressive hawkish policies. They already start, people are already mobilizing it to contest that. And this is an image of young women in South Korea. It says Sunjae Taegyeol. It means she is protesting against Yoon's bellicose rhetoric about preemptive strike against. It says basically what what the hell are you talking about? Why preemptive strike? Now you can also see that as I think I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, women in the 20s and 30s, young women are becoming the most interesting and progressive, sort of pushing a progressive reform. So here is, and they're very creative. You can look at her costume. This is the traditional, and she said war exercises. So she says that I'm going to catch those people who were warmongers, right? I'll be the ghost. And so they're going to have a press conference. Looks like today, actually, in South Korea time. And this is continuing this is the entire plan. This is a protest against war and defend peace against joint U.S.-South Korea war game. So there is going to be press conference in front of U.S. Embassy today in South Korea time. April 16, there's going to be candlelight in front of U.S. Embassy. April 24th, there's going to be a march in front of the Yongsan's South Korean defense compound. By the way, you probably heard that the controversy where President-elect not going to go to Blue House. He said he's going to move his presidential office to this Yongsan defense compound. It's becoming major controversy. And April 13th to 28th, in front of U.S. Embassy, there's going to be, every day, there's going to be one person speech and protest. So it's going to be all broadcast live, YouTube broadcast. And so again, young women. And this is Korea Peace Appeal. I think we are very familiar with that we've been doing. And more, in other words, what I'm trying to show is that grassroots peace movement in South Korea they're alive, vibrant, but there's no report. This shows that women work for peace. I think Ayoung and I think we participated in 2018. It says 2022 Women Peace Walk. So they are going to have this several months of peace walk starting from April all the way to November, starting from Jeolla, southwest, and southeast, Chungcheong, etc., and all the way to DMZ. And so they're going to finish their walk in DMZ, Gangwon, in November. So this is the peace walk from April 13th through April 28th. It shows that, what you can do. It says it's very creative, so you're going to give a speech. 7 reasons why you should stop. There shouldn't be any joint war game. And this one shows, you can sing, right? Sing song to protest against the war. And then this dance, and then speech in English against war, etc., etc., etc. Right? There's also speech contest, and then this one says, how to punish United States if they insist on doing that exercise, and to urge that South government should implement those inter-Korean agreements and making peaceful one Korea, etc. So it's going to be all broadcast YouTube live and etc. And another, actually, very important one. This is a Korean Metal Workers Confederation Union. This most powerful, most, I would say, the strongest union. They said that they already have declared war on Yoon Suk-yeol's anti-workers policy. In addition to being hawkish policy on the issue of peace and war, Yoon Suk-yeol has proposed the most ultra-conservative neoliberal economic agenda. It says that South Korea should reform its minimum wage law, people should be able to work more than 120 hours a week. So, he think that he also designated the Korean Confederation of Trade Union, KCTU, as the union. Actually, he identified as a union that he's going to be very tough on it. So because of that, and also in the meantime, Yoon Suk-yeol has said he's going to be all pro business oriented, pro corporation. No surprise. So this is March 25th. You probably remember, right? Cheongan, the downtown Seoul. They had a rally and they declare war on Yoon Suk-yeol's anti-labor policy. So they're going to contest. As you recall, what brought down Park Geun-hye's, what led to Park Geun-hye's impeachment, I don't know if you remember, was the major nationwide rally organized by Korean KCTU, Korean Confederation Trade Union. So it was a workers' movement, right? And so this is very important development. And this one says, president's duty is to build peace on the Korean Peninsula. That is his job, right? This is protest. So going back to reread, resisting, I think it's important to resist a hawkish pivot through supporting those pressuring policymakers and pragmatic and result-oriented approach toward that time. In fact, China last week, apparently it was reported that they're proposing the U.S. should halt join the military exercise with South Korea. And then in exchange, North Korea stopped testing ICBM, also nuclear weapons testing in the future. But this probably United States will not accept such a proposal. I think that Greg mentioned, China will continue to propose this, but probably United States is not going to agree with China. So but nevertheless, China is, it's important. China's cooperation is important because China has the kind of higher channel that with the North that neither Seoul nor Washington has. So it's important to work with China. And so I think the first step, although it may not lead to denuclearization, but it still jumpstart diplomacy and bring North Korea to negotiating table. So that is what I mean by pragmatic and result-oriented approach. And de-escalation with the North and China. As I also mentioned, United Liberal Progressive Front on the Korean side. And for our side, expanding solidarity with the other peace groups and prevailing in information war, which I hope that my talk is aiming at. I think that concludes my talk. And to conclude, to sum up, I think without vigorous resistance, the transnational, I'm going to actually go, without vigorous resistance, I actually, I have Hyun Lee's, I'm thinking of Hyun Lee, but if I have the picture, I thought that I may just cry. So without vigorous resistance, the transnational coalition of hardliners will force South Korea to serve as frontline to fight on behalf of the U.S. new Cold War. It will maintain a state of tension in the Korean Peninsula for the U.S. to justify its hold over South Korea, which I'm quoting actually Tim Bill, our eminent scholar based in New Zealand, and secure its forward military position in Asia against China and North Korea. The razor-thin victory for the conservatives in the Korean presidential election was not a mandate for anti-North Korea and anti-China policy, but it was a mandate for detente and peace settlement on the Korean Peninsula. Now, what I'm thinking is, if I say this, especially this very darkest moment, as defeat, electoral defeat, and also thinking about next difficult 5 years. Many of us probably will feel like we, might even wanted to just, not paying attention to or indifferent. Or some people say they're gonna just not even gonna read news, gonna wait for 5 years. But that's not gonna help. So I'm thinking because you already saw Hyunri's slide Hyunri's picture. I'm thinking, something that our great friend, brilliant activist, great mind, should have said, just one more push. I remember whenever she was, doing that all activist work, she always said one last push, don't give up. So I will end my talk with thinking of Hyun-Lee, and we miss her so much. And that's it. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you.
Oh, one thing here says I have actually Korean. This is I'm just quoting of the very famous protest song, which during Gwangju uprising, people's uprising in 1980, the times of Gwangju massacre. So it means that, those people who are still alive, you follow, although many people have passed away or, passed away without, seeing the, dream of a peaceful, unified country. So that is the translation.
That was amazing. I feel so privileged to be in this audience. I just don't know how to thank you. We are just so honored that you gave us all that information. It was amazing. So we have some time. Can you stick around? And
yes, of course. It looks like I did talk a lot too long, but I'm sorry about that. I wasn't paying attention to my time. So
every minute was golden, and I just I look in the chat, but people, we have some wonderful people here. I'm sure they have questions. I have questions. And thank you for ending it with that picture of Hyun-Lee. We, she's very special to the New York, New Jersey group also. So does anybody want to open up? Or I just want to say something, one question that kind of disturbed me while you were talking was that the North Korea threat sells well with the American people. That is very disturbing to me as an American. We have and maybe that's connected to what you're talking about, that Korea still is a minor issue with the West peace groups and needs to be more major, and that could counteract some of that. But I don't know if you have any material that backs that up, but it'd be something that we need to measure perhaps and understand.
I think that the North Korean threat sells well. I think that was in the context of why United States may not support peace or coexistence with the North Korea, which North Korea desire, because in this particular context, it's not just this kind of random hatred, but there's a policy rationale behind. That is, the North Korea threat will increase tension on the Korean Peninsula, which then, as I pointed earlier, Greg points out very well, and it's just kind of cover for U.S. anti-China policy. That's one thing. Another is, I have taught, for the last, I guess, 20 years, American students, and truly it's amazing what even we'll call the educated class, university students, but they know how little they know about North Korea. And also the second is North Korea is completely demonized. Demonized. It's evil. So in that sense, it is North Korea. So you don't have to, for American policymakers to keep their attention anti-North Korea rhetoric, you don't have to do much. And so that's why it's kind of, it fuels that no matter what North Korea does, and North Korea is always going to be portrayed as obviously the bad guy. And as the slide that I showed was how even the latest example where North Korea said, we're not going to even fire a single bullet towards the South unless we're attacked. And in the Western media, they will present North Korea not going to annihilate, United States or so. And if you get their data, there's plenty of data. It says that it shows how some Americans support using nuclear weapons, and North Korea's. So in that sense, I think that, North Korea threat sells well to the American people. It is for it to serve its policy purpose.
Wouldn't you also say, Simone, that the military-industrial complex, which holds so much sway and is, of course, vested in keeping up wars so that they can sell more arms, has a lot to do with the way the conservative media speaks and how policymakers who are lobbied speak. And so there is definitely a population here who buy the anti-North Korea rhetoric because it's for their own benefit. And that is scary because they're not just people who are answering a poll. They have a huge personal stake in keeping up that type of demonization and that type of need for more arms and more defense, etc.
Yeah, I think that's probably the also to some extent more important point. In other words, it's not just a rhetoric that is concrete, the material economic interest. And so South Korea is, as you know, is third largest importer of U.S. weapons. So as if there's no tension, if peace breaks out on the Korean Peninsula, basically, military industrial complex will lose their profit. So that's another reason. And also, I pointed out earlier, South Korea itself is becoming right now major weapons exporter. So that's, so there's that the shared interest between military industrial complex in the United States and also in South Korea. So yeah, but it's an important point.
Could I ask a question actually, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Please put it in the chat. I'm maybe missing it, but I'm not.
Yeah, there's one quick question, Ayoung. I don't know if you meant it, but at one point you said that the president-elect planned to allow people to work more than 120 hours a week.
Yeah, she said it.
We were trying to figure out how you could do that.
I know you guys go, oh my God, what? He actually said that, she said that some people wanted to work, more than 120 hours, but because it's a law, it's against the law, so they can. So, he basically said that, you're actually depriving people's freedom, opportunity to work longer and earn more money. So that's where I pointed earlier how really ignorant and how really it's just very anti-labor and ultra right-wing neoliberal view that he has. Yeah.
And we have another Suba.
I'd like to ask a question though. My question was regarding the elections, not the presidential elections, but like in the US, we have, the presidential election, and then we're going to have the congressional elections and, lower level political offices. In Korea, what is the next big kind of election? The parliamentarians, when do they come?
That's a good question. Parliamentary election will be 2024. And right now, the Democratic Party has a great majority.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So the next election for Parliament will be Korean Assembly will be 2024, and currently the Democratic Party has the majority. But there is also other upcoming elections. In fact, in June, there's going to be election to elect some governors and some of those seats in the National Assembly that have been vacant. And so it's going to be basically in 2 months, and it's going to be interesting if Yoon's win in the presidential, victory will kind of have a spillover, so that he's going to grab more. There's going to be another election for another victory for the Conservative Party, so that's coming. Another factor that's going to make Yoon's administration complicated is because it's a divided government. So the National Assembly, he'll be forced to work with the National Assembly, which is controlled by the opposition party, and so that's where that's where its situation is now.
Will that weaken Yoon's power in any way?
Pardon?
Will the opposition party being leading in the parliament for another 2 years, will that have a way of blocking some of Yoon's initiatives?
Well, that is the hope. But if you look at, unfortunately though, Yoon is just like a Trump. The guy, what he has shown is that he is very, in a way, if you are his supporter, you will really kind of trust, because he can get things done, and he will just keep pushing and pushing to get what he wants. For the opposition, now the opposition is going to be opposition party, Democratic Party, have shown that they had, as I pointed out in my talk, have been very ineffective, really disappointing with regard to implementing those reforms. And I mean, has the absolute majority. If they want, they can even pass enough seat to block all Yoon's initiatives. They can block his nominees. So the Democratic Party has the majority, that power. But the problem is there are a lot within Democratic Party. A lot of them could be easily Yoon Suk-yeol's supporters. A lot of them are conservatives. And they have actually been sabotaging. They're sabotaging those, progressive reforms, not from the Conservative Party, but so in other words, the Democratic Party itself has a lot of very, strong groups that oppose progressive reform. So that's why I'm saying, especially so you have a very strong, person like Yoon Suk-yeol, and the division within Democratic Party. So you put those two together. What I'm thinking are happening is pretty much Yoon is going to, probably he will be able to push a lot of those policies. So that's worries. But I think that based on what I've seen for the last 2 or 3 years, I cannot see if the Democratic Party is going to have guts or, strength to, implement those reforms. So which is very, it's sad, it's disappointing.
So there's something in the chat. We want to make sure that Subak talks about something related to your talk about the need for pushing back. And we have something planned in New York that Subak's been working really hard on. you want to talk about it, the human chain?
Thank you, Sally. First, thank you, Dr. Chun, Simone. A wonderful presentation. Wonderful.
Thank you.
And I belong to June 15 New York Committee. The full name is June 15 Declaration Implementation Committee. So I emphasize the action in our committee. Listening is important, learning is important, but how we show to other people, how we take action is the important part of my organization. And coming April 23rd, we are planning connecting 2 Korean UN missions in Manhattan, human chain. So I'm working hard, and also Sally, Ayoung, and Alicia helping with the program. I thank you so much. However, still, we need a lot more people should come to make a human chain. The South Korean mission and North Korean mission, 350 meters apart. And I need at least 150 people. We can make a human chain, and we can show the world how the Korean people living in domestically in Korea or overseas, we want so much one Korea. One Korea is so important, not only for Korean, but that problem make the lot of a problem in Korea. I mean, a peace matter. Once we united, I think in Asia, much peaceful area. America and DPRK especially make a peaceful relationship. I believe the whole world change, but Korea divided and America refused to make a relationship with the DPRK. It lasting 77 years so far. We don't know when we can make one Korea. However, we are so anxious to make it one Korea. And while I'm listening to Dr. Chun, I felt, yes, we are implementing Dr. Chun's presentation. So thank you very much. Please join us April 23rd, 11:30 or 11:40, Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza in Manhattan. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Subak. There's another question from Maud. Maud, do you want to just unmute and ask your question?
Okay. I wondered whether you could talk a little bit about the war games that are planned, these military exercises, if you know details about them, because my sense is they're really more horrific than most people understand.
Yeah, war game says a joint military exercise. Let me first mention there those people who going to U.S. and official South Korea official position. They said this is for purely, it's sort of a deterrence purpose against North Korea's threat, and it is not at all. If you look at their propaganda, it's not at all offensive. But that is not true. It has, as I mentioned, it has it includes a component of live fire drills. Although for the last 2 years, that live fire drills were not part of it because of COVID pandemic era. So they only focusing on computer simulation. It is contrary to what they're saying, it's not offensive. It is offensive because, as I pointed out, it includes specific plan of it's called decapitation plan, which means taking, assassinating or getting rid of North Korean leaders or leadership, which is also itself is problematic. Obviously, it's against international laws, and another is to go along with that. Actually, I do remember, meeting or talking with the Korean diplomat who was actually sent from Korean national intelligence, Kook Jong-un, and he was trying to convince me why it is important to get rid of North Korean leadership, because his argument was, which I think a lot of people still believe that, says once you get rid of North Korean leadership, majority of North Koreans, they are going to welcome, support United States-led, they didn't say invasion, but the operation. So that is their rationale. So in other words, their argument is based on the idea that North Korean elite is basically, it is not supported at all by their people. So if you get rid of the leadership, then you basically take care of the problem. And so another about the military exercise is that the military exercise itself, right? Itself will, for the North to respond to the military exercise. You recall, North Korea cannot just sit down and do nothing. It has to mobilize all of its military, all the military resources, especially in this time of pandemic. And you can imagine what kind of stress, what kind of tension that it will create. So U.S. South Korea joint military exercise has been the main cause of North Korea's main cause for the tension increasing, maintaining. Moreover, joint military exercise is violation of armistice agreement, by violation of armistice agreement. And because the armistice agreement stated that neither party should engage in any provocative act, because we are, as you know, there is no peace treaty. Korean War has not ended officially. No peace treaty, the state of halting the war. So in that sense, the joint military exercise is another reason, the most important factor that raised tension. So right now, actually, if you look at it, I haven't heard the latest news about this upcoming drill. And still there's in Korea, and also we are in the United States, we are trying to, have the successful campaign to suspend that drill. But my feeling is that they're going to go ahead anyway. And if Yoon gets elected, he is proposing going back to the full-scale U.S. South Korea joint military exercise. And in fact, he was criticizing Moon administration, saying that Moon has been appeasing North Korea by not having those live fire drills, by having only computer simulation. And so he said, he said clearly that he would like to see more expanded military drill. One more thing about the word drill also, this is point to the Korean soldier. I have 3 nephews, all served in the army. They are, finished their mandatory military service. One of my nephews served in very near the border. And he told me that whenever during the joint military exercise, whenever there is some, time of tension, he said just unimaginably harsh training for those Korean soldiers stationed. So imagine, young Korean young man, 20s. You can imagine, right? What a waste of their, lives in this useless war game.
Yeah. Well, I had a question about, the economic situation, the fact that inflation and housing prices and other reasons why people wanted to throw out the old government, get a new government. What are the it sounds a lot like what we might experience here in the midterm elections, that everybody's saying inflation, inflation, inflation. That's all people care about, and they're just going to probably change Congress. You know, we're going to be facing a rough midterm. What are the chances that Yoon and his government can do anything to improve the economy? And is that going to be another thing that maybe causes, you know, he'll get his run, but it won't last long?
That's a good point. About the economic issue. This is, I think, it's economic issue. It's shared by all of us. It's not just Korea. And at this time, at this level of capitalist development, we have basically, wages have been stagnant. In the meantime, there's a massive concentration of wealth, not creating, livable jobs with livable wages. And in the meantime, because so much, very minority of people have such a concentrated capital, they are going to gamble. So one of the places where they gamble are housings and all that, and they're driving up the housing prices as well. That's part of the game. And you don't have to read Lenin, the Marxist scholars to point out, but that's simple. Now, Korea has also added to that, though. Korea it's a very unique type of economic development where the economic development is led by major few oligopolistic corporation called Chevron, very highly concentrated, which based on very anti-labor policies, a platform which was actually created by former, dictators and the other conservative predecessors. And as a result, South Korea, yes, it is 10th largest economy. South Korea feels good about it. But if you look at the level of the poverty of elderly, income inequality, and also especially the what drove this election, right? There are probably the youth economic problems with the young people, youth unemployment issue. These are all, yes, that's, I wouldn't I really think that was probably the second most, or if not the most important factor that determined the outcome. Now, can Yoon do anything about it? I think not. Now we're going to look at, in fact, this was our thinking, there's already anti-Yoon movement. Now, Yoon's going to, I'll actually point out one more factor. Another thing that also made President Moon unpopular was because, it's still liberal government. So they tried to push some more redistributive economic policies. And they also, raised taxes on those people who owned more than 2 houses. And people didn't like it. Rich people were, offended by it, I suppose. And so that made Yoon extremely unpopular. So the richest people, and also if you look at the data, just like Trump, people who are the poorest and the richest voted for Yoon, just like Trump, right? And now I don't think Yoon is going to be able to address this economic issue. And the rising inflation, and South Korea's household debt is very high, very dangerously high. And with the rising oil price, when South Korea has zero oil, they're importing old oil. And also in the meantime, corporations have such anti-labor, this very greedy corporation have such a monopolistic power. And Yoon's going to more to help them. I don't see at all Yoon's going to be able to address any of this economic problem. Mm-hmm. For that's why I think he's going to probably, the winning election was easier for him. But I think that for him to provide any alternative addressing these economic issues, I don't see any prospect. Therefore, probably it will, quicken his demise as well. And the problem with that is, though, when you face that kind of challenge, I can already see that he's going to go after those who criticize him, and it's going to be we're going to have a new very repressive government, especially, and many people are right now in Korea saying that this election was actually coup d'etat by it was not South Korea's, it's not no longer military coup d'etat, but it's a prosecutors. And I'm going back to prosecutors' power because, there's a lot of corruptions, by, business groups. So when they're brought into law, what do? You hire the best lawyer. The best lawyers are usually those who are previous prosecutors, because they all have a connection. So what happened is that these prosecutors get enormously enriched simply because of their connection. So again, going back to your question, no, you won't be able to address these economic issues.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the time, and you've been so generous with your time. I just really want to thank you so much, Simone. This was a real education for me. And, just seeing things. Some of those figures, I think about South Koreans being in support of the peace treaty and for engagement. All of those charts could be so useful to us in our congressional meetings, because I was kind of worried when you started out that we might have some problems in, trying to engage, Congress to sign on to HR 3446 that, this election, the South Korean people voted for this hawkish president. But I think with your, we probably need to have some translations to English just for some of us. But, we could use that. I think we could use those really successfully with some of our New York delegation here. We do have 5 New York in the New York delegation, which are co-sponsors to HR 3446. I was just looking at the list somewhere. I hope I had the number right. We met with one of them today, Mondaire Jones, who is in the Westchester County. So, yeah, I would love to use some of those things in a meeting.
Of course, you're welcome to. And yes, I did. There's a lot of Korean in it, but of course, please let me know, and how I can help you with those,
Yeah.
messages. Yes, it is absolutely. The only you hear from the media is that, South Koreans voted for this conservative president. So that's their will. No, that is not at all that
right
is.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of, that we would have some problems. But I think with those charts and some of that other public opinion that is not available to us in English, perhaps. I don't know if it is. I don't. Those things I think we should try out, experiment with, and see how it works out with some of our more progressive delegation. And, we can share it with the rest of the network.
Another thing also, let me also add that, I mentioned about one way I think also we can also convince Biden people, some of the Democratic side, is that Yoon Suk-yeol this guy is anti-feminist, anti-women, anti-worker. He's just misogynistic. And so culturally, I think this is where, so in other words, just say, how I remember how Democrats, did not like Trump at all. So you say, well, we have a Trump-like guy in South Korea. And can you imagine, being associated with someone like Trump? And think about it, so I think in that way we can also kind of,
Yeah, that's another good idea. Subak has his hand up, so.
Yeah.
I have a question to Dr. Chun. I saw the 여성 평화 걷기, Women Peace March. I like to connect my activity and that activity together. I appreciate you leave the contact number or email, anything for me to contact. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, in the Korean article, there was yeah, they had the phone number and everything. So if you, I think Sally has my email address. So if you shoot me an email, I'll definitely give that information, and also the chairwoman of this movement, this peace walk. So yeah, definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay,
Sally,
I
if
think,
could
yeah,
I
go
get-
ahead. I think we probably need to close up, so.
For those of you who really must go, please forgive me, or please sign off if you need to leave. But I need to ask Simone one quick question, maybe long answer, but quick question. In view of the fact that the Yoon's group was able to merge with others and form a larger voting bloc for him, what were the obstacles in the way of Lee's group, kind of gathering other smaller subsets of groups to broaden his base? And I applaud the woman who ran and took like 2 point some%. I think it's a precedent that we should all keep our eyes on. But if she had folded in with Lee, would that have made the big difference?
Yes, Lee would have won.
And were there overtures made and she stood fast and said no, or what happened there?
What happened was, now on the conservative side, there was a last-minute merger between the main conservative party, People's Power Party, and also another People's Party, Anchersu. They merged. So 1 week before the election. So that tipped the balance. Anchersu, that he had about 9% of support. So that easily. Stan, you're talking about the Sim Sang-jung, who received 2.4% of vote. Now that is called Justice Party. Now Justice Party is kind of left over from the Korean Democratic Labour Party, KDLP left party. Now that all those progressive party left party was, more radical progressive party were kind of splintered. They were also highly repressed by the conservative president, and one progressive party was pretty much, disbanded, forced to disband. And now going back to Sim Sang-jung, yes, she would have, if she had merged with Lee would have definitely, no doubt, because she received 800,000, more than 800,000 votes, and Lee lost by about 250,000 votes. So she definitely would, if they had merged, Lee would have been a president-elect right now. Why did she not merge with Lee? One, she's very politically ambitious. Secondly, also it's very important, her formal official explanation is that she, even if she doesn't win, it's important to contest because two-party system is corrupt. So there has to be, so simply being able to keep the third party, however minor it is, alive is important. And but there's another actually, there's a rumor, speculation that she was actually indirectly helping Yoon Suk-yeol. And there's even the allegation of financial, what do you call, deal. So, she did not merge with Lee. And now, if you look at her response, the Justice Party argues that the Democratic Party has not been at all pushed for any sort of merger interest, shown any interest with them, so that they actually blame on the Democratic Party. But that being said, so what is the likelihood of kind of the one that I included in my talk, liberal progressive front? That will be ideal, but the problem is Liberal Party, Democratic Party do not want to has fear of identifying with this sort of minor left party, because they'll be considered as, they are too radical. because they are, appealing, trying to appeal to the middle centrist, middle ground. But so if you have solidarity with this, what they consider fringe minority, minor radical party, it's not going to be good on their part, the image of their party. So that's why they're not doing it. But at this point, I would say that they should. I mean, this is actually I would support. They should have a united front. One more thing I would also point out is that Democratic parties are very, very conservative. Now, again, I'll just emphasize still, because not everybody's so depressed and dejected. Again, this is the very creative new sort of movement are led by young women in the 20s. They are called, in Korean, called 개딸. It sounds very weird, but it means that daughters who support reform. We are daughters of reform, progressive reform. So they're very different from previous movement, and based on laborers or other peace activists. You go their protests, they're all, playing K-pop, and they all have costume, and very uplifting, positive, the kind of positive attitude you have when you are in the 20s, right? The pretty, sophisticated, very bright, very courageous.
Mhm.
So I think that's, I think although this may sound very, it's almost like not so significant kind of movement, but I think that it is also, it is adding, it is creating energy at the time when the conservatives seems to have, they said they have, they won. Right? It's theirs, Korea is their country. So I think that, so to respond to your question, the merger among liberal, progressive, leftist parties have a lot of, there are a lot of obstacles. That's why they haven't been able to do it. Very divided.
What's going on with the young men?
Young men. Young men, Korean, that really, I have not even seen this. I mean, this sounds so alien, but the young men have really became so toward conservative. They're reactionary, and also it's led by, actually, I shouldn't misrepresent too much, exaggerate too much. There has been this sort of very militant minority, really almost like women-hating male group who in the past, even 5 years ago, would have been totally, outcast, not even taken seriously. They slowly have become right now in the mainstream. They actually, the head of Conservative Party, Lee Jun-suk, who graduated at Harvard, who was in his 36-year-old guy. If you don't know Korean, consider it as a blessing. Why? Because the kind of thing that Yoon Suk-yeol and also this 36-year-old, this right-wing, very reactionary chair of Conservative Party, what's coming out from his mouth is just truly appalling. It's saying something like feminism is responsible for lower birth rate in Korea. And the women should go to, if you want equality, you should also go to serve the military, service. So women are getting already advantage in all their, job interviews. They already get the advantage because of their women. And the fact that young men can't find jobs is because women are taking all the jobs, etc., etc., etc. So we have right now in the guys 20s and also 30s the most reactionary, I would say, right-wing kind of movement that's you saw in the data. So it's stark contrast between male and female, but I would say this has also been exploited by this very fringe group, and so I think that's also part of the reason. So it's alarming. And
yeah, I think those guys, to answer your question, Sally, what's going on with those guys? I think they're the breeding grounds for wife beaters and intimate partner abusers and they're just like,
Yeah, you know, also you guys, I said that it's if you don't read Korean, consider it a blessing. It's that Yoon also claimed that he said that actually this was actually reported in CNN and everywhere. And he said that there's no structural discrimination against women. It's all it's the individual's fault.
right, right. Wife beaters, like I said, domestic violence is going to go up even more.
Yeah, and also there's all the other issues that of course I didn't talk about it, but that the sexual harassment and also the internet. Maybe I wouldn't go that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, anyway, it can get really bad. And actually, the root for that probably comes from the tiny little part of the Confucian philosophy that laid out the hierarchy of who's more superior and who's less superior. Anyway, sorry for going on and on, but Simone, as Sally feels very responsible for keeping time, and she is good at it, and I have ruined it. But thank you so much.
Thank you. It was, yeah, we're going to spread this recording around. I hope you're okay with that, because it was fantastic. I hope I'm going to load it up to a YouTube site and then share it with our group and with the I think that maybe Echo will help us get it to the larger group, or Alicia, and then Peace Action. I'm going to share it with them. I don't know, up the women against war.
Yeah.
Everyone, please.
I don't know whether Echo and Alicia themselves are competent or available to do the translation, because some of those charts are meaningless unless they are in English, because the narrative, the captions. So we'll try to see how we can work those out into English translation, Simone.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think with your narrative underneath, that was okay, for purposes, but there might be a couple of those charts that will be very useful to us, for trying to, we'll need to get the chart exactly from you and maybe translate it. Maybe, I think we should try. Maybe when we meet next time, we do it in the second Monday of the month. I think I put the date somewhere in one of the emails. We'll meet again and we'll try this approach. I personally am curious to see if we can work on some of these representatives, because it really is important that South Korea wants this engagement. It's like the US saying we want it doesn't carry as much weight as the Koreans want it. When we're talking with our representatives.
The second Monday of May is the 9th. That's our next meeting, folks.
Yeah.
And everybody, thanks so much for coming today. And thank you for Sally for getting the tech, all of that ready. That's my weakness. And we'll see you next. Simone, join us sometime just for the fun of it.
Of course, I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Everyone works very hard. The labor of love. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Hazel. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
더 나은 세상을 위해 공정한 언론의 역할을 다하고자 노력하는 JSTV는 전 제작진의 자발적인 참여로 만들어지는 독립 언론이자 대한 매체입니다. 방송이 마음에 드셨다면 응원의 표시로 지금 좋아요, 구독 버튼을 눌러주세요. 감사합니다.